The night air was cool over the small houses on Briar Glen, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own breath. Marcus Reed jogged the last block home, sweat cooling on his skin, the steady rhythm of his footsteps calming his thoughts. He had always loved the night. Less noise, fewer eyes, a little more truth. When he reached the driveway, he paused and looked up at the porch light Alicia always left on for him. It glowed like a promise. You're safe here. The front door opened before he could reach for the handle. There he is, Alicia said, smiling like she always did, soft and bright at the same time. Midnight soldier, you trying to outrun sleep again? Trying to outrun these knees, he teased, stepping inside and kissing her forehead. How was your day? Busy, the kids were restless. But we had a breakthrough with one of them. She hung his towel on the chair back and nodded toward the kitchen. Your drink is on the counter. Coconut water since you refuse to love normal water like the rest of us. He grinned and took a long sip. You spoil me. I invest, she said. There's a difference. They moved around each other with practiced ease. He unlaced his shoes. She put his phone on the charger. He checked the back door. She turned off the hall light. Home lived in these small motions. Home was the way she looked at him when he didn't say much. Home was the sound of her laugh bouncing off the walls like music that never blew out the speakers. Tell me about your program idea, he said, leaning on the counter. The one you said keeps you up at night. Alicia's eyes warmed. Family counseling, but simple and close to home. Saturday circles, food on the table, childcare in the next room. No intake forms designed to scare people away. Just chairs, honesty, and steady hands. And you. He held her gaze. It'll work. It will, she answered, steady. But we'll start small. I don't need a grand opening. I need a door that's open. A pair of headlights slid across the front windows and drifted on. Marcus's eyes followed the light until it disappeared. The low hum of an engine faded at the end of the street. He didn't step to the curtain. He didn't need to. That cruiser again? Alicia asked, hearing what he didn't say. They've been circling. He kept his tone even. 3 nights this week. Slow passes. Long looks. Maybe they're just bored. The words felt thin even to her. Maybe. He took another drink and set it down carefully. I've learned to trust quiet signs. In the field, the quiet parts always spoke first. She stepped closer, touching the seam of his t-shirt with her fingers. You aren't in the field anymore. Sometimes the field finds you. He softened his voice when he saw the worry in her face. But we're fine. We lock the doors. We live our lives. We don't flinch. I don't want to live in fear, she said. You don't, he answered. You live in truth. That's different. They moved to the living room. The clock on the wall clicked past 12. Alicia tucked her feet under a blanket and leaned into him. Promise me something, she said. No matter what happens out there, we guard in here. This house, our peace. I promised that the day I met you, he said. You just didn't hear it, she nudged him, smiling. I hear you now. On the TV, the late news droned on about a nearby drug sweep. Names and addresses blurred into a fast headline. Marcus watched with half an ear, more habit than interest. He knew the posture of bad nights. He knew the shape of mistakes before the world named them. He had led men through doors with danger breathing on the other side. He had trained himself to measure rooms in heartbeats, exits, and angles. But with Alicia tucked against him, the house felt louder with love than with old reflex. I'm proud of you, you know, she said, looking up. Not just the medals. The way you live. Calm, fair, careful with your power. Power gets people hurt when it's careless, he said. Discipline keeps people alive. And it keeps love alive too, she added. You taught me that. Another slow roll of headlights washed over the wall and faded. Alicia watched his jaw tighten for a second and then loosen again. If you want me to call the precinct, no, he said. Not for a feeling. We keep notes. We keep calm. We don't give them the story they came for. She studied him, then nodded. Okay, we keep calm. A wind lifted the edge of the porch flag and let it fall back against the pole with a soft tap. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and went quiet. The world tried its best to look ordinary. The world almost got away with it. Alicia shifted, laying her head on his shoulder. When I was talking with one of the moms today, she said something that stayed with me. She said, peace is just a word people use when they don't have to fight for it. What did you say back? he asked. I told her peace is a practice, and practices need people. She brushed her thumb over his wrist. I think that's why you and I work. Because we practice? He smiled. Because we show up. He kissed the top of her head and turned off the TV. The room dimmed to the soft glow of the porch light and the numbers on the microwave. He could feel his body letting go of the day, the steady hum of readiness lowering like a drawbridge at night. He closed his eyes and listened. The house settling, her breathing, the hush that only safe places make. Come on, she whispered. Sleep before your brain starts another marathon. They stood, fingers laced, and walked down the short hall past the framed photos. Boot camp graduation. Their tiny courthouse wedding. Alicia in a yellow dress laughing open-mouthed under July sun. At the bedroom door, he paused and looked back toward the front of the house, not out of fear, but out of habit. He checked the lock again. He checked the quiet again. Everything held. Hey, Alicia said softly, pulling him back with a look. You don't have to be a soldier here. I know, he said. Here, I'm yours. They lay down with the window cracked just enough to let in the summer night and the faint, clean smell of cut grass. Alicia reached for his hand under the sheet and squeezed once. Door open, she murmured, half asleep. Light on, always, he answered, letting his eyes fall closed. Outside, the street exhaled and settled. Inside, the house gathered them like a sheltering wing. They slept under the roof they had built with patience and vows, unaware that somewhere in the city, a line of numbers had been typed wrong. A map pin had been set one digit off, and a convoy was being briefed by men who believed a quiet house could be entered loudly and explained later. The porch light kept burning, steady as a heartbeat. The clock read 12:03 a.m., when the street outside filled with the low growl of engines. Marcus stirred in his sleep, not from noise, but from instinct. Years of deployment had trained him to sense tension in the air, the kind that arrived seconds before chaos. He sat up, listening. The house was quiet except for Alicia's soft breathing beside him. Then a faint metallic clatter echoed from the porch. He turned toward the sound, his muscles tightening. Alicia, he whispered, touching her shoulder. Stay here a second. She blinked awake, her voice groggy. What is it? I don't know, he said, and just stay still. Before she could reply, the front door exploded open with a thunderous crash. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and shouts filled the hallway. Police! Search warrant! Get on the ground! Alicia screamed and clutched the blanket to her chest. Marcus's body moved before his mind could catch up. He leapt out of bed, heart hammering, the sound of heavy boots closing in. Stay where you are. A voice yelled from the hall. Marcus raised his hands instinctively. Wait, there's been a mistake, he shouted, his voice booming through the dark. Flashlights pierced the hallway like blades, slicing through the smoke of shattered drywall. He couldn't see faces, just silhouettes and guns. The men fanned out, barking orders, their adrenaline drowning out reason. Alicia's voice cracked. Marcus, what's happening? I don't know. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand. I'm calling 911, but as he turned, a beam of light locked onto him. He's reaching for something. Marcus froze. It's my phone, he yelled. I'm calling for help. Drop it. It's a phone. The next moment stretched into eternity. One loud crack split the air, deafening final. Alicia gasped, her hand pressed to her chest. Blood bloomed between her fingers, dark and spreading. Marcus caught her before she fell, the world tilting around him. Alicia, stay with me. His voice broke into something primal. He pressed his hands against the wound, his training taking over. You're okay, look at me. Her lips trembled, eyes wide with disbelief. Marcus, don't talk, he said desperately, his voice shaking. Breathe. Just breathe. Behind them, chaos roared, shouting officers, stomping boots, someone yelling, clear, as if the word could erase what they'd just done. Marcus's mind blurred between combat memory and present horror. He felt her heartbeat fade beneath his hands. He screamed for help, for medics, for anyone. She's bleeding out. Call an ambulance! But instead, two officers grabbed him from behind, forcing him to the floor. Get down. Hands behind your back. She's dying, he cried. That's my wife. Don't move, one shouted, pressing a knee into his back. You're under investigation. He thrashed against the weight, but another blow pressed him down. The cuffs snapped around his wrists. He turned his head just enough to see Alicia lying still, her hand reaching toward him. Fingers limp, something inside him broke quietly. Not loud like the door, not violent like the shot, just a deep fracture that no one could see. Through the haze, he heard fragments of confused voices. "This is the wrong address. Are you sure? Target's 2 blocks down. God." "No." Marcus lifted his head enough to see their faces. Pale, panicked, already searching for words to make sense of what couldn't be undone. "She's gone," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You killed her." One officer, younger, trembling, tried to speak. "Sir, we thought—" Marcus's glare cut through him like steel. "You didn't think. You never do." They pulled him to his feet, his wrists bound, his clothes soaked in his wife's blood. He stumbled out onto the porch where flashing blue and red lights washed the yard in chaos. Neighbors peeked from windows. Some filmed on their phones, too afraid or too detached to help. An officer droned through a radio, his words cold and procedural. "Suspect detained. Female casualty confirmed. Scene secure. Suspect, casualty. Secure." Marcus stared at the words forming from their mouths, each one stripping away humanity. He wanted to scream, but no sound came. His jaw clenched, his chest hollow. The night was alive with movement. Radios crackling, boots crunching glass, a medic team rushing past. But he felt trapped inside silence. When they finally led him to the curb, he sank to his knees. His eyes never left the house. It no longer looked like home, just another broken space under flashing lights. A paramedic whispered to a sergeant nearby. "She didn't make it." Marcus bowed his head, the cuffs biting into his skin. He wasn't crying. Tears felt too small for what had been taken. He breathed in the smell of gunpowder and dust and whispered to himself, "You were supposed to be safe." Behind him, one of the officers muttered, "Wrong damn address." Marcus turned his head slowly, locking eyes with him. "No," he said in a low, shaking voice. "You got the right house. You just picked the wrong man." They didn't understand what he meant, not yet. But the look in his eyes said everything. A storm was coming, not of bullets or revenge, but of truth. He sat there on the curb, hands bound, watching them cover her body with a white sheet that looked too small to contain all that she was. And as the night swallowed the sound of sirens, Marcus Reed, former Navy SEAL commander, realized that the war he thought he'd left behind had finally found him again, right at his own front door. Morning came like an insult. The sunlight touched the blood-stained porch, the shattered door, the yellow tape that fluttered lazily in the breeze, as if nothing had changed, as if the world didn't just end inside that house. Marcus sat in an interrogation room at the precinct, his wrists raw from the cuffs. His mind was numb, his body heavy. He'd been asked the same questions a dozen times. What did you see? Did you hear them announce themselves? Did you have a weapon? The words looped around him like noise without meaning. Every time he opened his mouth to answer, his voice sounded far away, hollow, like it belonged to someone else. She was asleep. "I was trying to call for help," he said again. "I told them there was a mistake." The detective across the table didn't meet his eyes. "It's been a long night, Mr. Reed. We'll sort this out." "Sort it out?" Marcus repeated quietly, disbelief creeping into his voice. "You killed an innocent woman in her own home." The man flinched, shuffled his papers, and stood abruptly. "We'll be in touch." Then he walked out, leaving Marcus alone with the hum of the ceiling light and the sound of his heartbeat in his ears. Hours later, they let him go. No apology, no explanation. Just a single line. "The department extends its condolences for your loss." Outside, cameras flashed as he walked to his truck. Reporters shouted questions he couldn't answer. "Do you think race played a role, Mr. Reed? Were you resisting? What's your response to the police statement calling it a tragic error?" He didn't respond. He couldn't. He drove home on autopilot, his hands gripping the wheel tight enough to make the leather groan. When he pulled up to the house, the scene was already cleaned. The front door was boarded shut, the police tape torn down, the blood on the floor scrubbed away. Only the faint smell of bleach lingered, a ghost of what had happened. Marcus stepped inside. The silence hit him harder than any explosion he'd ever heard. The couch was still tilted, the coffee table shattered. a single photo frame face down on the floor. He picked it up carefully. It was their wedding picture. Alicia was laughing, sunlight in her hair, her hand on his chest. His throat tightened. He pressed the photo to his forehead and whispered, "I'm sorry." The next few days blurred together. Calls came from people he didn't know, from reporters, from community groups. He didn't answer any of them. Neighbors stopped by, leaving flowers and cards on the porch but never knocking. They were kind in the way people are when they're afraid, polite but distant. At night, Marcus sat on the edge of their bed, unable to sleep. The sheets still smelled like her perfume. He could hear echoes of her voice in every room. The way she hummed while cooking, the way she laughed when he teased her. But when the memories came, so did the rage. He'd spent 20 years learning control, discipline, precision, composure under fire. In war, that control saved lives. But here in his own home, it felt useless. He thought of the officers' faces, their carelessness, their excuses. He thought of the word they used, accident. His fists clenched until his knuckles popped. "Accident," he said aloud, his voice shaking. "You call it that because it wasn't your wife." Sleep refused to come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Alicia reaching for him, blood on her hands. Sometimes he woke up thinking he heard her calling his name. Other times he stayed awake, afraid that if he slept, she'd fade away completely. On the fourth day, a letter arrived. The envelope bore the seal of the district attorney's office. Marcus sat at the table staring at it for a long time before opening it. The words were short, clinical, cold. "After reviewing the available evidence, our office has determined that no charges will be filed. The officers involved were acting within the scope of their duties and in good faith. We extend our sympathy for your loss." Marcus read it twice. Then the third time, his hand trembled. He let the paper fall to the floor, the sound soft but sharp enough to break something inside him. He stood up slowly, every breath deliberate, his jaw tight. "Good faith," he muttered. "She died in her own home, and you call it good faith." He walked outside and looked at the house, their house, now stripped of its warmth. The neighbors watched from across the street but said nothing. Fear, guilt, pity. He could see all of it in their eyes. Later that evening, he drove to the cemetery where Alicia's body had been laid to rest. The grass was still new, the soil uneven. He knelt by the headstone and rested his hand on it. "They called it a mistake," he said quietly. "But it wasn't. It was what happens when they stop seeing us as people." The wind carried his words away, but he kept talking, like she could still hear him. "You used to tell me not to let anger change who I am. You said peace was worth fighting for. But I don't know what peace is anymore." He sat there long after sunset, the chill creeping through his clothes, his breath fogging in the air. For the first time in years, he felt small. Smaller than the uniform he once wore. Smaller than the medals he'd earned. Smaller than the promises he couldn't keep. When he finally stood, his body was stiff, his heart heavy. But there was something new beneath the pain. Not rage, not despair, but clarity. He knew now what the system expected him to do. Break quietly, disappear quietly, move on quietly. But Marcus Reed had never been built for silence. He turned toward the horizon, the fading light catching in his eyes. "You told me to be calm, Alicia," he whispered. "But you didn't tell me to stop." And for the first time since that night, he knew what he had to do. Days passed in a haze, each one heavy with repetition. Wake up. Stare at the empty chair across the table. Avoid the phone calls, try to remember to eat. The world kept moving, but Marcus stayed still, like time had chosen to leave him behind. Every morning, the news mentioned the unfortunate raid that ended in a tragic accident. He turned the TV off each time before they said her name. Alicia wasn't an accident. She was everything he'd fought to come home to. One afternoon, as he sat on the porch, a car pulled into his driveway. A woman stepped out, mid-30s, sharp eyes behind thin glasses, a small notepad in her hand. She introduced herself with calm confidence. "Mr. Reed, my name's Leah Thompson. I'm a journalist with the Atlanta Ledger." He didn't move. "I've said all I need to say." "I know," she replied, not backing down. "And that's the problem. You said the truth once. They buried it." Her voice carried the kind of conviction Marcus respected. He studied her for a long moment, then gestured to the chair beside him. "You've got 5 minutes. Leah sat, crossing one leg over the other. I've been following your case. The police report doesn't add up. The warrant listed a completely different address, and one of the officers on scene has a record of misconduct. Marcus's jaw tightened. I'm not surprised, she leaned forward. You served 20 years in the Navy, led special operations overseas, and now they're painting you as an unstable veteran. They're trying to make your wife's death disappear into paperwork. But I can help you fight that. Fight? He said bitterly. I fought for half my life. You think they care about one more battle? They care when people start watching, Leah said. When the truth becomes too loud to ignore. Her words cut through the fog in his mind. Marcus turned his gaze toward the yard where Alicia used to plant flowers each spring. The soil was bare now, just earth and silence. You think you can get the truth out? I don't think, she said. I know. For a moment he saw the faint reflection of the fire that once burned in him. The kind that planned, acted, endured. He stood and went inside. When he returned, he carried a stack of documents, a small external drive, and the police letter that called her death. Good faith. I keep records, he said simply, setting them on the table. Military habit? Leah smiled faintly. Then we're halfway there. Over the next week, Leah visited often. She combed through Marcus's files, comparing them with public records and police statements. She worked late into the night, sitting at his dining table surrounded by notes and a flickering laptop screen. Marcus watched her work, torn between gratitude and grief. One evening, as they reviewed the dispatch logs, Leah froze. Here, look at this. She pointed to a timestamp. The call for the raid came in at 11:57 p.m., but this report, the one clearing your address, was signed at 11:59. They ignored it. Marcus's stomach turned. They knew before they entered. Leah nodded grimly. And still broke down your door. The next day, Leah tracked down an anonymous source within the department, a dispatcher who confirmed what Marcus already suspected. Officer Darren Cole had been in charge that night, and this wasn't his first mistake. 2 years ago, he led another wrongful entry into a black family's home. The case was dismissed quietly, the department calling it a procedural error. Leah leaned back, sighing. He's protected. Every report gets buried before it reaches the press. Marcus looked at her, his expression unreadable. Not this time. He walked to the living room, stood before the mantel where Alicia's picture rested, and spoke softly as if she were there. You told me not to let anger change me, but maybe anger has a purpose. That night he recorded a video. No theatrics, no shouting, just truth. Sitting in front of the same porch light Alicia had insisted stay on every night. Marcus looked into the camera. My name is Marcus Reed. I served this country for 20 years, and my wife, Alicia, believed in everything it stood for. Justice, fairness, safety. 2 weeks ago, those who swore to protect us took her life instead. They broke into the wrong house. They called it a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was negligence. It was fear disguised as duty, and it cost her everything. He paused, his voice steady but sharp. You killed the wrong woman, and you broke the wrong man. Leah uploaded the video that night. By morning it had been shared across the country. Thousands commented, thousands more protested. Veterans posted messages of support, mothers shared stories of fear, and strangers demanded accountability. The truth had found its way out, and no one could put it back in a file drawer again. Within days, the police department held a press conference, their tone defensive and rehearsed. The officers acted in accordance with standard procedure, the chief said. This was an unfortunate tragedy, not a criminal act. Marcus watched from home, his jaw tight. Standard procedure, he repeated under his breath. That's what they call killing us now. But the tide had already turned. Leah's reports exposed a chain of falsified records, missing body cam footage, and a pattern of wrongful raids disproportionately targeting black households. The story spread to national media. What had been labeled a tragic error was now being called what it truly was, a crime. Still, the department pushed back. They called Marcus unstable, hinted at PTSD, painted him as dangerous. The same narrative that had justified fear in that dark hallway was now being used again, this time in headlines. Leah slammed her notebook shut in frustration. They're trying to discredit you. To make the public doubt everything. Marcus nodded slowly, the calm of a soldier returning to him. Then they haven't learned who they're dealing with. He stood, straightened his posture, and met her eyes. We take it to court. Leah smiled, exhaustion giving way to admiration. Then let's finish what they started. That night, Marcus sat in the quiet house once more, the same place where his world had ended, now becoming the command center of his new mission. He whispered into the still air, "You were right, Alicia. Peace isn't silence. It's the courage to stand up and speak." And as he turned off the lamp beside her picture, the light that remained was no longer just hers. It was his too, steady and unyielding. The courthouse smelled of old wood and tension. Reporters filled the halls, whispering to one another, cameras flashing every few seconds as Marcus Reed walked through the doors. He wore a plain black suit, no medals, no insignia, nothing to remind anyone that he had once led soldiers into war. Today, he was not Commander Reed. He was a man seeking justice for the woman he loved, and the country he'd once fought to protect. Leah walked beside him, clutching her notes, her expression calm but focused. "They'll try to provoke you," she murmured. "They'll twist your words to make you seem dangerous." Marcus nodded. "They've been doing that my whole life. I'm used to it." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric, crowded with press, officials, and ordinary people who had followed the story online. The front rows were filled with supporters holding quiet signs that read, "Justice for Alicia Reed." On the other side sat the officers involved in the raid, dressed in uniform, their faces hard and expressionless. Darren Cole, the man who pulled the trigger, sat closest to the front, his jaw set, eyes hidden behind a mask of indifference. When Marcus took his seat, the judge entered, and the room rose. The hearing began with the prosecutor recounting the events of that night. The words were clinical: wrong address, failure of communication, tragic outcome. But when Leah presented the evidence she and Marcus had gathered, the tone changed. The court watched as the dispatch logs flashed across the screens, showing the ignored correction to the address. Then came the missing body cam footage, the falsified timestamp, and the records of Officer Cole's previous accidental raids. Cole's attorney objected repeatedly, but each objection only made the truth louder. Leah's voice never wavered. "This was not a one-time mistake," she said. "This was a pattern of negligence, a pattern protected by a system that values power over accountability." When Marcus's name was called to testify, the room fell silent. He walked to the stand, his posture straight, his movements deliberate, a soldier's control masking a man's grief. The prosecutor approached. "Mr. Reed, can you tell the court what happened that night?" Marcus's voice was quiet but carried through the entire room. "I was asleep beside my wife, Alicia. We heard a crash. No warning, no knock, just shouting. I thought it was a break-in. I tried to call for help. Before I could say a word, they shot her." He paused, breathing slowly, his hands folded tightly in front of him. She wasn't holding a weapon. She wasn't threatening anyone. She was just standing there, scared. He looked directly at the jury, his eyes steady. "I've been in war zones. I've seen men lose their lives because of hesitation, and I've seen others die because of arrogance. What happened that night wasn't fear, it was arrogance. They didn't fear for their lives. They feared seeing mine as equal to theirs." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge rapped his gavel once for silence, but even he didn't look away. Cole's defense attorney stood. "Mr. Reed, would you say your military background has made you reactive under stress?" Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Reactive?" he repeated. "I've faced armed insurgents. I've had seconds to decide between life and death. You know what I learned from that? Discipline, patience, control. The kind of control your client didn't have when he fired at an unarmed woman in her own home." The lawyer looked rattled. "You're suggesting Officer Cole acted without cause." "I'm not suggesting," Marcus interrupted, his voice rising slightly, the calm still holding underneath. "I'm telling you, he acted without discipline, and because of that, my wife is dead." For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the sound of Leah's pen scratching notes. Even the jury seemed to lean forward, caught in the weight of his words. When Marcus stepped down, Leah gave him a small nod, not of victory, but of respect. She knew what it cost him to stay composed when his heart wanted to roar. Then Darren Cole took the stand. He looked uncomfortable, his hand twitching as he adjusted the microphone. His lawyer guided him carefully. "Officer Cole, can you explain your decision that night?" Cole cleared his throat. It was dark. The man reached for something. "I thought it was a gun." Leah stood immediately. "Objection. The victim's husband was reaching for a phone, as proven by the forensic report." The judge nodded. "Sustained." Cole shifted in his seat, sweat beading at his temple. "Look, I was following protocol." "Protocol," Leah said sharply, stepping forward. "Like ignoring a corrected address? Like disabling your body cam 5 minutes before entry? Like pulling the trigger on a woman before confirming who was even in the house?" Cole's lawyer objected again, but the damage was done. The tension in the room was palpable. Leah turned toward Cole. "You had every resource to know where you were. But you didn't check. Why?" Cole hesitated. I trusted my team." Marcus, watching from the bench, whispered under his breath. "And she trusted hers." The final piece of evidence came from Leah's anonymous source, a recorded dispatch confirming that the team had been warned about the wrong address before the raid began. The voice over the speakers was clear. "Negative. The target address is 743 Maple, not 734. Repeat, 743. The courtroom froze. Cole's face drained of color. The judge leaned forward, his tone stern. "Officer Cole, how do you explain this?" Cole opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Leah spoke softly. "There is no explanation. Only the truth." By the time the hearing ended, the entire room knew what the verdict would be. The grand jury indicted Darren Cole for manslaughter and falsifying reports. The department faced federal investigation for misconduct. The headlines that night didn't say tragic mistake anymore. They said system exposed. As Marcus left the courthouse, microphones were thrust toward him. Questions shouted from every direction. "Mr. Reed, how do you feel about the verdict?" He stopped on the courthouse steps, the autumn wind brushing against his suit. "Justice isn't victory," he said quietly. "It's survival." Leah placed a hand on his shoulder, and together they walked past the cameras down the long steps into the open air. The sky was gray but peaceful. For the first time since that night, Marcus felt the faint weight of something like release. Not happiness, but something close to it. The kind of peace that comes when truth finally breathes. He looked upward, imagining Alicia's voice, steady and warm. "Don't let anger change who you are. I didn't," he whispered. "I just made them see who I was all along." Months passed and the noise slowly faded. The reporters moved on to new stories. The public outrage quieted, and the courthouse that once overflowed with protest signs and candlelight vigils stood empty again. But for Marcus Reed, the silence after justice was its own kind of war, not loud but lingering. He woke up each morning to a house that was still hers, to rooms that carried her scent and her laughter, now only in memory. Yet something in him had changed. The rage that once lived behind his ribs had settled into resolve. Leah visited one afternoon with a small envelope. "It's from the city council," she said, smiling faintly. "They approved the grant. The community center's happening." Marcus turned the envelope over in his hands. It felt heavier than paper should. "Alicia's idea," he murmured. "Her name's on the front," Leah said softly. "The Reed Foundation for Youth and Justice. They wanted you to give the opening speech." He looked at her, unsure what to say. "I'm not the speech type." Leah tilted her head. "You've already said everything that mattered. The rest is just reminding people why they listened." The center opened in spring, in a renovated school building near downtown Atlanta. The walls were painted a calm shade of blue, and the front hallway displayed a quote Alicia had once written in her journal. "Peace is not silence. It's equality." Her handwriting, framed in gold, was the first thing visitors saw. On the day of the opening, the crowd filled the hall. Neighbors, families, veterans, even officers from the same department that once looked away. Marcus stood at the podium, his broad shoulders slightly hunched, his voice quiet but firm. "This place began as my wife's dream," he said. "She believed that people could change if they just had somewhere to be seen, somewhere to be heard. Alicia wanted this to be that place." He paused, letting the stillness settle. "We live in a country that calls itself free, but freedom means nothing if it isn't shared." My wife was killed because someone saw her as a danger instead of a person. I can't change that night, but I can change what happens after it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, some wiped their eyes. Marcus took a breath and continued, his voice deepening. "We named this foundation after Alicia, but it's not just hers. It's for every family who's been told to stay quiet, every child who's been taught to survive instead of live, every person who's been made to feel small for existing. This building stands because of her, but it will stand for them." When the applause came, it wasn't explosive. It was gentle, full of respect. People rose to their feet, not for spectacle, but in solidarity. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Leah joined him by the stage. "She'd be proud," she said. Marcus smiled faintly, his gaze distant. She already was. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. He stood alone for a while, watching children run past the building's entrance, their laughter loud, fearless. It sounded like healing. In the weeks that followed, the Reed Foundation became a gathering place. Families came for counseling, veterans for mentorship, young people for tutoring. Marcus spent most of his days there, not as a hero or a headline, but as a teacher. He led workshops on discipline and mental strength, often reminding the kids that anger was energy, and energy could build or destroy, depending on how you used it. Sometimes, when he locked up late at night, he'd walk through the empty rooms and imagine Alicia walking beside him. He'd whisper updates like she was still listening. "We had 15 families today. Leah's training new counselors. The garden's almost done." And every time he reached the front door, he'd glance at her quote on the wall and say quietly, "You were right." A year after the verdict, Marcus returned to the cemetery. The grass had grown lush and green, dotted with lilies. He placed a single white flower on Alicia's grave and knelt beside it. "It doesn't hurt less," he said softly. "But it hurts with purpose now." He looked at the sky, pale blue and endless. "You told me not to let anger change who I am. I didn't, but it changed them, Alicia. It changed this town. People are paying attention now. You did that?" He rested his palm on the stone, letting the warmth of the sun seep through it. "I still miss you. Every day. But I'm learning how to turn missing you into motion." As he stood, a gentle breeze moved through the trees, rustling the leaves like a quiet response. He smiled, eyes glistening. "Yeah," he whispered. "I know." Walking back toward the car, he passed two young boys riding their bikes along the path, laughing as they raced each other. They waved when they saw him, and he waved back. The world had not healed completely. Not yet. But it was trying. Before leaving, he looked once more at the graveyard bathed in sunlight. The silence felt different now. Not hollow, but peaceful. The kind of silence born not from defeat, but from endurance. Marcus Reed drove away with the window down, the wind in his face, the faint echo of Alicia's laughter in his memory. Somewhere behind him, in a small building painted blue, her words hung over the entrance like a promise. Peace is not silence. It's equality. And for the first time in a long time, he believed it.